There's a version of you living rent-free in someone else's mind, and it's slowly consuming them. Not because you were perfect, not because you were particularly kind, but because you became something far more dangerous in their inner world. You became unresolved. And the human mind does not tolerate unresolved emotional experiences. It obsesses, it loops, it replays, it distorts reality just to locate some form of closure. And when it cannot find it, it starts unraveling their peace instead. But here's the truth. The more they attempt to forget you, the deeper you sink into their subconscious. They tell themselves they've moved on. They rehearse indifference like it's a carefully prepared performance. They distract, replace, numb, escape. And yet, in those quiet moments when the noise fades and the defenses fall apart, you return. Not as a memory, but as a disturbance. Because you are no longer simply a person to them, you are a psychological knot. And this is where it tends to get complicated. Because what they're truly fighting isn't you anymore. It's what you awakened inside them. You didn't just touch their life. You exposed something buried, something they had spent years repressing. A need, a wound, a forbidden desire. And now, that part of them refuses to go back into hiding. Most people don't recognize this. They assume forgetting someone is about time, about distance, about filling the space. But forgetting isn't a conscious act. It's a negotiation with the subconscious, and their subconscious is refusing to cooperate. Why? Because you became associated with something they cannot find a replacement for. Not your face, not your voice, not even your presence, but the feeling they had when they were with you. A feeling they find themselves unable to recreate, no matter how hard they try. So now, their mind appears caught in a loop. Why them? What did they carry that no one else does? Why does letting go feel impossible? And every failed attempt to answer those questions only seems to tighten the grip. But here's what they'll likely never admit. They don't actually want to forget you. They want to overcome you. They want to arrive at a place where your absence no longer touches them. Not because they've healed, but because they've proven to themselves that you were never as significant as it felt. And this is where the mind tends to fracture, because reality refuses to accommodate that narrative. You were significant. You left an impression. You disturbed something stable inside them, and the ego cannot tolerate that. So it fights back. It rewrites memories. It distorts your image. It converts love into resentment, attachment into dismissal. But every distortion carries a cost, because the more they deceive themselves about you, the more unstable their interior world tends to become. And this is where it grows even more layered. They start projecting. They see you in strangers, hear you in particular songs, feel you in moments that have nothing to do with you, because the mind is trying with urgency to resolve what it cannot fully comprehend. But resolution requires confrontation. Confrontation requires honesty. And honesty would force them to acknowledge something they are not yet prepared to face. That losing you wasn't just losing a person. It may have meant losing a version of themselves they cannot reclaim. And that recognition tends to frighten them, because now the question is no longer, why can't I forget them? The question shifts. Who was I when I was with them? And why does that version feel so unreachable now? And that's where the real obsession may begin. Not with you, but with the identity that seemed to dissolve when you left. They start chasing fragments, trying to reconstruct the feeling, recreate the intensity, find someone who triggers the same emotional response. But nothing seems to hold, because what they're pursuing was never simply about you. It was about what you unlocked, and that door, once opened, does not close easily. So they spiral, quietly, privately, invisibly. On the surface, they function. They smile, they move forward, they keep up the performance. But internally, they're negotiating with ghosts, replaying exchanges that no longer exist, imagining outcomes that will never unfold, struggling against emotions they can't quite manage. And every time they feel as though they're finally past it, something small draws them back. A particular scent, a single word, a silence that feels strangely familiar, and suddenly they're right back where they started. If you are still watching this, you are already part of the rare few who are willing to face what most people spend their entire lives running from. 97% of people scroll past content like this, not because it does not reach them, but because it reaches them too deeply. If this is already moving something inside you, subscribe to Carl Jung Psychology right now and turn on notifications. What you are about to hear does not just explain how the mind refuses to release someone. It may permanently change how you see yourself. But here's the part most people tend to overlook. The more they suppress this cycle, the stronger it may become. Because repression doesn't eliminate emotion, it buries it alive. And buried emotions don't simply disappear over time. They wait. They develop. They can mutate into anxiety, into restlessness, into an unexplainable pressure that never fully lifts. And now, they're not just trying to forget you anymore. They're attempting to escape themselves. But that may prove impossible, because you are now woven into their internal structure, not as a memory, but as a trigger, as a symbol, as something their psyche uses to represent everything they never resolved within themselves. And this is where the boundary between memory and identity begins to dissolve, because they can no longer determine whether they miss you or whether they miss the person they were when they felt something genuine. And that confusion doesn't fade. It can deepen, because every attempt to move forward feels artificial, forced, hollow. But they refuse to speak it, because saying it would require confronting the one truth they've been avoiding. They didn't lose you by accident. They may have lost you because something inside them wasn't yet ready to hold what you represented. And now that awareness is beginning to surface, slowly, painfully. When it fully emerges, it won't simply hurt. It may shatter the very illusion they've been sheltering behind. That moment when denial cracks. That moment when the performance becomes impossible to sustain. That moment when they finally have to face what you genuinely meant and what losing you actually cost. And when that moment arrives, they won't just be trying to forget you anymore. They'll be trying to survive the truth. They believed distance would dilute you. They assumed silence would weaken you. They convinced themselves time would erase what you meant. But something unfolded differently. Time didn't erase you. It distilled you, stripped away the noise, removed the distractions, and left behind only the essence of what you represented. And now that essence seems to be everywhere. But here's the truth. The human mind doesn't suffer from what is present. It tends to suffer from what is absent yet unresolved. And you became the absence that refuses to stay quiet. So they attempt to reclaim control. They analyze, dissect every moment, every exchange, every silence. What did I miss? When did things shift? Why did it end the way it did? And this is where things become complicated, because analysis is not healing. It may often be a disguised form of obsession. The mind performs the role of searching for answers, but may actually be attempting to rewrite the past, to locate a version where you didn't leave, where they didn't lose, where they were enough. Most people don't catch themselves in this pattern. Closure is not something that gets found. It tends to be something you eventually accept without fully understanding. And they are not yet ready for that. Because accepting it would mean admitting there was perhaps nothing they could have done to keep you. So instead, they resist. They replay scenarios where they say the right thing, act differently, notice the signs earlier. They construct alternate timelines inside their own minds, worlds where you stayed, worlds where it worked, worlds where they didn't have to carry this weight. But every constructed scenario collapses under one undeniable reality. None of it is real. And reality is silent, cold, and indifferent to what we wish had been. It doesn't negotiate with longing. It doesn't soften for regret. It simply remains. And they are left to live inside it. But here's what they're unlikely to openly acknowledge. They don't miss you the way they think they do. They miss the unfinished story, the interrupted narrative, the emotional momentum that had nowhere to land. Because the human psyche seems to crave completion. Beginnings reach toward endings, and when an ending remains unclear, the mind may generate its own, over and over again. And this is where the internal fracture tends to deepen, because each version of the ending carries a different emotional quality. In one, blame points outward. In another, it turns inward. In another, they convince themselves it never truly mattered. But none of these versions bring settlement, because none of them are entirely true. The subconscious tends to know that. It doesn't accommodate comfortable distortions. It operates on something raw. And what it holds on to is both simple and devastating. You mattered more than they were ever willing to acknowledge, even to themselves. And now that suppressed recognition is beginning to surface, breaking slowly, but with overwhelming force. You can sense it in the cracks, in the moments they go unexpectedly quiet, in waves of irritation without cause, in the hollowness that settles in the middle of something that should feel satisfying. Because what they may be experiencing is not purely sadness. It tends to look more like displacement, a psychological misalignment between what they genuinely feel and what they're prepared to acknowledge. And that creates tension, constant, subtle, quietly exhausting. But here's what they've been working to outrun: You didn't just leave a memory, you created a reference point. Every person they encounter now tends to get compared to you. Every new connection measured against what they felt in your presence. And very few seem to pass that threshold, not because others are insufficient, but because the experience with you was never fully processed or understood. And this is where it grows even more layered. They may begin unconsciously undermining new connections. They pull back when things feel close. They lose interest when something becomes stable. They create distance where closeness might be possible. Why? Because stability no longer feels real to them. Intensity does. And you redefined what emotional intensity looks like. Now anything that falls short can feel empty. Anything calmer can feel artificial. Anything healthy can feel unfamiliar. So they oscillate between craving connection and withdrawing from it, between wanting to move forward and holding on to what's gone, between telling themselves they're fine and sensing something fundamental is off. And the most difficult part? They might not even realize they're doing it, because this isn't a conscious pattern. It's subconscious conditioning. What emerges when an emotional experience is too powerful to integrate? So instead of being processed, it becomes a template, a quiet internal standard by which everything else gets measured. Before we continue, if what you're hearing is touching something you've carried before, leave the number 39 in the comments right now. In Jungian psychology, individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole, is sometimes described through 39 stages of inner confrontation and integration. If you've ever felt that someone revealed a version of you that you couldn't sustain, drop 39 below. And if Carl Jung psychology has been part of how you think about these things, make sure you're subscribed and notifications are on. There's more content on the subconscious, shadow work, and what depth psychology reveals about how we attach and let go, right here when you're ready. And this is where the mind may begin to work against them. Because now nothing quite satisfies. Nothing resolves the internal unrest. Nothing fills what's missing. And the more they search outward, the more apparent it becomes that the true source of the tension is internal. But the challenge with turning inward, that's where you exist. Not as a person, but as a psychological imprint. As something bound to their identity, to their vulnerability, to the version of themselves they briefly accessed and then seemed to lose. And confronting that requires a degree of honesty many people spend their entire lives avoiding, because it forces them to acknowledge they weren't simply attached to you. They were revealed by you. And now that version of themselves feels out of reach. And this is where a quiet desperation may begin to take shape. Not the visible kind, but a subtle internal urgency. A need to feel something real again. To reconnect with that lost sense of aliveness. So they take risks, emotionally, psychologically. They pursue experiences, people, moments, anything that might recreate what they once felt. But each attempt tends to fall short, and with every disappointment comes the same haunting recognition. It wasn't just the circumstances, it was something specific to being with you. And that recognition doesn't bring clarity. It can bring a kind of collapse, because now they're confronted with something they cannot resolve externally. They cannot return to what was. They cannot find a substitute. So what remains? Perhaps only one authentic path forward, to finally sit with what has been avoided. But the moment they stop filling every silence with distraction, the moment they sit in genuine stillness with their own mind, they will have to face the one question that may change everything. Not, why can't I forget them? But, why did they affect me this deeply when almost nothing else ever has? And the answer to that question is already somewhere inside them, waiting, uncomfortable, quietly persistent. And once it fully surfaces, it won't just reshape how they understand you. It may dismantle their entire understanding of themselves. And they can sense it drawing nearer. That moment where distraction loses its hold. That moment where denial begins to release its grip. That moment where the truth rises, not gently, but relentlessly. And when it does, they won't be analyzing anymore. They won't be performing indifference. They won't be pretending to remain unaffected. They'll be standing face to face with something they can no longer sidestep. At some point, the distractions begin to stop working. Not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly, like a slow, barely perceptible fading. The noise thins. The substitutes lose their power. The constant motion no longer numbs the way it once did, and suddenly they're alone with themselves. And this tends to be where things begin to unravel, because silence doesn't bring ease to a conflicted inner world. It brings exposure. What they're confronting now isn't simply memory, it's return. The return of everything pushed down, everything minimized, everything they convinced themselves didn't carry the weight it actually did. Not in sequence, not logically, but emotionally raw, disorganized, difficult to contain. A look you gave them, a moment they dismissed, a feeling they avoided naming. All of it resurfaces, demanding to be felt. And this is where things can grow genuinely difficult, because acknowledgement requires responsibility, and responsibility means admitting something that cannot be undone. On some level, they may have always known. They knew it mattered more than they allowed themselves to express. They sensed something was different about what you represented in their life. They recognized this wasn't something ordinary, but they hesitated. They suppressed. They chose the comfort of emotional distance over the vulnerability of genuine engagement. And now that choice is reverberating through everything. Most people don't fully see this pattern in themselves. Regret isn't always pain about what happened. It may more often be pain about what you allowed to happen. And that distinction tends to cut more deeply than almost anything else. Because now, they're not just mourning you, they're confronting themselves. The version of themselves that stayed quiet when something needed to be said, that withdrew when staying present was what the moment called for, that performed detachment while everything underneath was signaling something entirely different. And that realization tends not to settle quietly. It persists. It returns. But here's what makes it so difficult to carry. They cannot change it. There is no action available, no words that would close the distance, no moment to return to with a different response. The past is sealed, and yet their mind keeps returning to it, like pressing against a door that will never open again. And this is where something may shift fundamentally inside them. Because the psyche cannot sustain prolonged internal contradiction indefinitely. They told themselves they didn't need you, but their emotional reality suggests otherwise. They convinced themselves they had moved forward, but their internal state refuses to reflect that. And when those two forces meet, something has to give. So the mind may split. One part continues the performance. I'm fine, it's over, it didn't carry that much weight. While another part grows louder. You lost something real. You let it slip. You may never encounter that again. And the tension between those two voices can become something extraordinarily difficult to sustain, because both can feel true at the same time. And this is where the deeper questioning tends to begin. They start examining not just what happened between you, but their own patterns, their recurring tendencies, the things they've never fully looked at. Why did I respond that way? Why did I withhold? Why does this keep unfolding the same way? And suddenly, it may no longer be about you at all. It may be about something older, a recurring, largely unconscious pattern that has been quietly shaping their experience for years. A tendency toward avoidance, toward emotional compression, toward a fear of vulnerability that presents itself as self-sufficiency. And now they can see it, not as an abstract possibility, but as something that may have cost them you. Because patterns cannot be directed toward external circumstance. They point inward. And this is where the subconscious may begin to fully surface, because repression holds only until awareness catches up. Awareness has arrived, uninvited, uncomfortable, persistent. They start connecting threads they never wanted to see. Moments where they closed off, signals they chose not to acknowledge because doing so would have required genuine change. And now they can see they weren't truly in control. They were reacting, conditioned, repeating, following patterns they didn't know existed. And you interrupted that pattern. You drew them out of what had become automatic. You brought them into contact with something real. And instead of staying in that contact, they retreated. And now they're beginning to understand what that retreat may have cost. If you've ever sensed that the person you lost wasn't just a person, but a mirror, leave the number 11 in the comments below. In many symbolic frameworks and depth psychology traditions, 11 carries the resonance of awakening, the threshold between who you were and who you are becoming. Let's make this comment section a space where that awareness gets acknowledged rather than buried. And if Carl Jung psychology has been part of that inner journey, subscribe and stay connected. There's more of this work ahead. And this is where the internal pressure may reach its peak. Because now, they're holding two nearly unbearable truths at once. They cannot return to what was, and they cannot return to who they were before any of this happened. The earlier version of themselves, the one that moved with a certain comfortable emotional distance, is no longer accessible. Too much has been seen. But the new version hasn't yet taken shape. So they exist somewhere in between, in a kind of psychological limbo, no longer who they were, not yet who they might become. And that space tends to be unstable, deeply uncomfortable. The kind of threshold where people either grow or collapse under the weight of what's been uncovered. But here's what they may be reluctant to face. There can be a genuine fear of growth, because growth would require confronting everything that was avoided, acknowledging the moments that passed, accepting that they were not as self-aware as they believed. And most people at this threshold tend to retreat again, back into familiar distractions, back into denial, back into the performance of control. But this time, it may not hold the way it once did. Because once something has been truly seen, it tends to resist being unseen. Every distraction feels somewhat transparent. Every escape feels temporary. Every attempt to push things back down only seems to amplify them. And this creates something new, something that carries more weight than ordinary regret, something deeper than sadness alone. A quiet, persistent psychological pressure that never quite fully releases. And this is where the internal structure may begin to show its fractures, not in ways visible to others, but in the texture of thought, in the quality of feeling, in the way nothing quite lines up anymore. Because the mind is trying to reconcile two incompatible realities, the life visible on the surface and the truth uncovered beneath it. And that reconciliation tends to demand change. But change requires courage, the willingness to meet difficulty without negotiating the terms. And they're not entirely certain they have that yet. So they hover near the edge, aware but still resisting, beginning to understand but still sidestepping what understanding requires, feeling everything but still working to contain it. And that pressure accumulates day after day until it reaches a point where something has to give. And when it does, it tends not to arrive quietly. It comes as a release, the kind held back longer than is sustainable. They can feel the pressure building. They can sense the story they've been telling themselves beginning to lose its hold. They can hear something growing louder beneath all the noise. And when it finally breaks through, it won't wait to be invited. It will simply arrive. And in that moment, they won't be able to retreat. They won't be able to reason it into something manageable. Everything that has been held beneath the surface will demand to be felt all at once. And then it happens. Not in stages, not with any warning, but suddenly. The collapse, the moment where every mechanism built to protect them fails at once. No distraction holds. No logic provides comfort. No familiar narrative can contain it. Because the truth doesn't wait anymore. It enters. But here's what's actually taking place. What's overwhelming them isn't only emotion. It's exposure. Total, undeniable exposure to themselves. No filters, no constructed narratives, no comforting distortions, just raw awareness. And this is where something fundamental shifts, because now they may finally see the full pattern, not fragments, but the complete picture. They see how they withdrew from depth when depth was what the moment asked for, how they withheld honesty to protect the ego, how they mistook emotional distance for strength.
And this is where it can become almost unbearable, because they can trace it. Every moment of real hesitation, every choice that may have slowly created the distance between you. And now, there's nowhere left to step back from it. Most people never arrive at this point. They turn away before the recognition becomes this clear. They find a way to bury it again. But this time, that option may not be available. It's too precise, too undeniable. And here's what tends to reach the deepest. You didn't leave because you didn't care. You may have left because they couldn't quite meet you where you were. And now they understand that, fully, painfully, without revision. And this is where the ego may finally give way. Because the ego sustains itself through the illusion of control, through the belief that I managed this, that I chose this outcome, that it didn't carry the significance it appeared to. But all of that may dissolve under a single recognition. They didn't lose you because they wanted to. They may have lost you because they weren't yet capable of holding something real. And a limitation of capacity points entirely inward.
There is very little distance you can put between yourself and that. So now they feel it, everything suppressed, all the truth avoided, all the emotions buried without being processed, rising all at once. And it doesn't surface as simple sadness. It surfaces as something heavier, something that doesn't dissolve quickly. Recognition, the kind that seems to rewire something fundamental, the kind that forces you to see your own limitations without the relief of excuses. And this may be where genuine transformation becomes possible, through the collapse itself. Because at that point, there may only be two paths: face it fully or continue to fracture. But facing it requires releasing an identity that has been carried a long time. The certain one, the detached one, the one who doesn't get reached this deeply. All of that may need to fall away because it was never the complete truth. It was protection, a self-concept built to prevent exactly this kind of pain. And now it no longer holds. So what remains? Something rawer, something less certain, something that no longer has the option of performing in vulnerability. And this is where it can become genuinely disorienting, because rebuilding from that place requires something they may not have had to practice before. Not rebuilding around comfort, not around ego, but around truth. And truth tends to be unsparing. It requests responsibility. It asks them to confront every part of themselves they've been avoiding without conditions. They find they cannot do it halfway, because partial awareness often generates more conflict than none at all. So they stand there in the aftermath of their own collapse, aware, exposed, and perhaps genuinely honest for the first time in a long while. And here's what can feel unexpectedly difficult. Once a certain level of awareness has been reached, it tends to resist being reversed. You cannot perform not knowing once you've clearly seen something. You cannot return to the version of yourself that made those choices without awareness. That version is no longer accessible. And now the weight of that settles in. Because growth in this form doesn't feel like progress, it feels like loss. The loss of a comfortable illusion, the loss of a self-concept that provided protection, the loss of a story they believed about who they were. And standing inside that loss, they may begin to understand something they couldn't have arrived at any other way. You weren't the source of their pain. You may have been the mirror, the one who reflected everything they hadn't yet faced, the one who exposed the gap between who they were and who they could become. And that's likely why you couldn't simply be forgotten, not because you were without flaws, but because you were somehow revealing. You showed them something genuine, something that required more from them than they were prepared to give. And now they may finally feel ready. But readiness and timing don't always arrive together. Timing tends to be indifferent to self-awareness. It moves, and when it moves, it carries certain possibilities with it. So now they're left with something that cannot be undone. Understanding without access, clarity without connection, awareness without you. And that combination doesn't tend to fade with time. It etches itself into how they think, into how they feel, into every future connection they reach toward. Because now they know what it felt like to encounter something real, and they know what it may have cost to not yet be ready for it. And that knowledge doesn't bring comfort, it stays, because every time they meet someone new, there's a comparison they don't choose but make anyway. Every time something starts to build, there's a hesitation they can't step around.